Hello, everybody. Welcome to this ACT sponsored event to meet with Janani Ramachandran, ACT's endorsed candidate for our assembly seat. My name is Paul Foreman. I am an ACT member and will be facilitating this event. A meeting of this size requires another set of eyes, so Emma Sullivan, Janani's campaign director, will be assisting me. There will be an opening statement from Janani, followed by a Q&A session driven primarily with questions you place in the chat box. If I see a need for clarification of an answer, I will follow up. All invitees will be muted, and the questions submitted in the chat box will not be displayed to you. My goal will be to present as many questions as possible within the 1 hour time frame. Questions have arisen as to why ACT is supporting a candidate whose views are not fully aligned with ours. The answer is simple. She is independent and progressive and not aligned with a regressive political machine. Conversations with Janani have convinced us that she sees the commonality in everybody's concern with the critical issues of the day: climate, police reform, equity, the influence of money in politics, and housing. She recognizes that these are very complicated issues requiring a careful balancing of interests and has an open ear to differing points of view. This is what ACT wants in a candidate. At this point, do we have a candidate?
She's actually still joining us. She kind of got a little stuck on her way back from another event, but she'll be on in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
So I'll just jump in and say thank you all for being here. We are 3 weeks out from Election Day at this point, which is pretty wild. During the primary, there was about 21% voter turnout, and so anything that folks can do to be talking to your neighbors, making sure that everyone knows there's an election, especially, given the fact that they've just gotten one ballot, they'll be getting another ballot coming up here soon for the recall. So just kind of wanted to say this is really crunch time, and having you all here to, hear Janani out, ask questions, and, just learn more about the campaign and where we're at is really huge and means a lot to us. So thank you all so much for being here.
I will say this, I should have mentioned before, that if any of you are having any trouble connecting completely to this event, you can put that up in the chat box, and we will try to get some assistance to you via email or whatever. Of course, you'll have to include your email if you do need help.
Awesome. All right, and she's just joining us now.
Okay.
So let me. Let's see.
We're waiting for her. I'll also suggest to you that you might find this works better for you if you put yourself on if you choose the speaker viewing mode, so that you won't have to be looking at all the other pictures on the screen and will only be seeing the speaker. If you have a PC, it's on the upper right-hand corner of the screen, that little view icon up there. On an iPad, I think if you just touch the pad, it will eventually come up. On other devices, I don't really know. You have to experiment with that. Okay, where are we?
There she is. She's joining us now.
There she is. Hi, Janani. How are you? Not working too hard, I hope.
Doing the best I can.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to introduce you because I think it's more important that you introduce yourself. You don't know a lot of these people and they don't know you. So you can just make an opening statement, whatever you want to call it, and then we'll follow that up with the Q&A session. I will remind everybody on the Q&A, you feel free to post questions in the chat box. And I'm going to try my best to see that all of those questions are presented and that there's even, if I see a need for follow-up, I'll follow up on my own. Okay, Janani, go
Sorry,
ahead.
give me 1 second. I'm having a little tech issues.
Okay.
Okay, all good, I think. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. My name is Janani Ramachandran. I am a social justice attorney and a native of the East Bay, born and raised here, and running to be your next state assembly member. So I wanted to zoom out really quick and talk a little bit about who I am, where I've come from. So my family, I come from a family of immigrants. My grandparents moved to New York City in the early 70s in search of a better life. They came here without a dollar or a degree, just a dream to give their kids a better life. And they joined labor unions, and they were eventually able to earn living wages, have quality health care, have a stable pension. And I'm super grateful for that pathway out of poverty into into the middle class. And unfortunately, given the way our system works here, that American dream, that so-called American dream, does not exist anymore. California is the wealthiest state in the nation. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet 1 in 3 Californians live at or near the poverty line. 1 in 3 Californians don't have real health insurance. 170,000 are homeless on a given night. And I am driven to try to address these inequalities, and have been ever since my first job out of college, which was working as a home visiting community health worker. I worked at a federally qualified health clinic, serving immigrant mothers, teen moms, many of whom were survivors of domestic violence, many of whom were on the brink of homelessness, experiencing wage theft, experiencing mental health crises, and of course many who had incredibly high-risk pregnancies. And these were experiences that shaped me. Being in the homes of people in absolute moments of crisis made me realize that our systems must change. We need to think more deeply about the roots of these causes in order to have a California that works for all of us, not just some people. So I went to law school. I attended Berkeley. And my entire time there, I continued to do direct community legal services. I continued to work very closely with survivors of domestic violence, but I also worked a lot with tenants. I represented a lot of elderly tenants throughout the East Bay who were being evicted from no fault of their own, people who had never missed a day of rent in their lives for the most part, people who were immigrants and didn't have access to the legal system or knowledge of really what was things that were going on and what their rights and responsibilities were. And I also learned in that process that a lot of the issues with some of the folks in housing court that I was working with, it was not always about one individual landlord and one individual tenant. It was about a broader system that involved corruption. So learning about some of these cases of corruptions, corrupt city workers, corrupt code inspectors, I was driven to try to do something about that. So I served on the City of Oakland Public Ethics Commission. I served as commissioner there. And while the commission was certainly only able to address a small slice of corruption, I believe that we were able to really make an impact on, going through whistleblower complaints, trying to make our government more transparent and accountable, making sure that government agencies were fulfilling requests for public records as they are required to do so under law. But a lot of the times it was investigating and finding wrongdoers and bad actors. And the thing is, we have corrupt systems, certainly not only at the city level, but we have this at the state. The influence of money in politics is incredibly, incredibly important to me. I think it's a big reason why we don't see the changes that we want to see. Take Medicare for All, for example, one core aspect of my platform that I care deeply about. 1 in 3 Californians don't have access to real health insurance. 1 in 3 California, yet 1 in 3 healthcare dollars doesn't actually go towards treating patients. It goes towards these broader, to health insurance company profits. And so we're in a system that prioritizes shareholder profits over the needs of people. So why haven't we gotten 70% of Californians believe in this single payer type of healthcare system? Why hasn't that happened yet? Because of big pharma, insurance companies, and many other actors funding people's campaigns. Even in this race, for example, because insurance companies and these actors who don't want every Californian covered by quality healthcare insurance have heard about my staunch commitment to a Medicare for All system. They have decided to pour almost $200,000 into my opponent's campaign to make sure that I, being a strong proponent of Medicare for All, don't get elected. Take minimum wages, for example. I am a proponent of raising the minimum wage. $15 does not cut it anymore. $15 never really worked, and wages have remained flat for years upon years. I am proposing to work towards a $22 minimum wage, partly because if wages had increased since the 1960s at the rate of productivity, we would be at a national $25 an hour at this point. But wages have remained flat while we're working harder than ever and communities are trapped in poverty. I believe strongly in the need to address climate change. We have our shorelines eroding, our air quality worsening all the time. And we need to start taking active measures. Just as I mentioned a second ago with healthcare, most Democrats in California, and we have a supermajority of Democrats in our state government, believe that climate change is real. And it's one thing to believe something is real and important to address, and another to actually take action on it. And the reason we're not seeing real action on climate change in the state of California is, once again, because of the powerful special interests, for particularly the oil and gas industry, and those in the fossil fuel industry that are funding Democrats' campaigns. Other things that I care about include tenant protections. I mentioned I was a tenants' rights attorney, but really during the pandemic, I was driven to do this work because I was representing folks who had never missed a day of rent in their lives, who were being evicted in the middle of a global pandemic. And our state laws, our federal laws, were not going far enough to protect them. We need to make sure that people can be housed. We need to make sure that more people can stay in their homes, stay in their neighborhoods, be able to live near where they work, be able to stay in the communities that they want to and choose to, and have real family or chosen family in these neighborhoods, and deserve to have freedom of mobility to where people want to live. And finally, I mentioned that I worked very closely with survivors of domestic violence. That really ties into access to justice. Who has access to the court systems? Who has access to remedies to keep themselves and their families safe? It's more often than not survivors of domestic violence, because we live in a system where our courts are so clogged because our state doesn't prioritize the needs of children experiencing custody battles. Survivors of violence don't have access to the courts because their stories are so often not believed by institutions. Immigrants don't have access to the courts because we never have enough culturally relevant services and interpreters to be able to hear their cases. So to me, access to justice, making sure our court system is more efficient, more streamlined, is incredibly important, and something well within the power of the legislature to amend the family code, to amend the civil code. And those are are some of the many things that I care about. And, stepping more broadly into other things going back to what I mentioned earlier, I believe that corporate interests are playing an incredible role in politics at home and abroad, but are really influencing this campaign. And I'm proud to be a corporate dollar-free candidate, specifically because the only people that I want to be held accountable to are constituents, are people, not corporate special interests. I don't want anyone whispering in my ear that I need to vote this way or vote the other way. I'm guided by values. I'm guided by my general goals. I'm guided by the need to listen to different people, build coalitions, and work together. But I'm not guided by money and the people that fund campaigns. I'm proud to have an incredible grassroots campaign that's launched. And we have over 650 incredible volunteers. We have raised through small dollar donations for the most part, under $100 donations for a large part, over $300,000 in a relatively short amount of time. We have the most number of endorsements from within the district. We have so much people power on our side from across the board. I live in Oakland, but we have incredible supporters from Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. We have people that more broadly believe in the need for change. Business as usual politics is not serving so many of us. So many people don't have a voice at the table, and I want to make sure that we have a diversity of voices represented. If elected, I would be California's very first South Asian Assemblywoman. If elected, I would be California's first ever LGBTQ Asian American Assemblywoman. I would also be the only I would be the only Asian and Pacific Islander woman at all in our legislature. Representation does matter, and these are some of the many things that I would bring. I'm also a tenant, and I would be just one out of 3 tenants out of 120 lawmakers. And these are perspectives that are valuable and impact policymaking, and I'm excited to bring those lenses of my identity, but more importantly, bring my passion for the need for change, for the need to come up with bold, creative ideas, for the need to listen to constituents, not corporations. So I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to pause right there and start by taking a couple of questions.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with a doozy. I don't agree with the conclusion of this questioner, but to be fair, I think we got to get this out of the way at the beginning. Why has your campaign distanced itself from ACT?
Okay. I don't believe that we have distanced ourselves from ACT. I believe that we should be speaking to all community groups. I'm excited to be here to also listen, to share about who I am, but listen to you all. And I'm going to be totally honest. There are a lot of members of the public out there who don't want me to listen to different voices, including many of yours. They want me to be closed-minded enough to not listen to different people. And that's not the kind of person that I am. I believe that I can have differences with people's policies, but that doesn't mean I don't engage with groups. We need to build coalitions to practice any of the kinds of things that I want to be passed. And there are not simple answers to any of these questions. And I am excited to listen to all of you and to make sure that we are in communications. I might not agree with everything that you might have to say. You might not agree with what I have to say, but realistically, I am up against a machine that wants to attack me for even being in this room, for even listening to what we have to say. And the reality is this district belongs to us, constituents, people with different perspectives on issues, because people are different. We're never all going to agree on the same 10 points of a politician's platform. But that's the point. We are meant, and I am proud to be able to listen to a diversity of voices. I'm not afraid to say where I stand on issues, but I'm also not afraid to say that I have a lot of learning to do. And I'm not going to back down to a machine that wants to attack me for listening to diverse voices.
Thank you. Second question, why are you accepting backing from some unions but not from others?
I did not apply for backing of any police unions. I am proudly supported by the ILWU, the Longshoremen, by CWA, and by UAW, which represents folks in universities. CWA has quite a range of membership, including at a lot of nonprofits, social justice oriented legal nonprofits, and others that I've worked with in the past. And the ILWU, which is perhaps the largest union that is working with me. They're also the first union in California to integrate racially, and it's a majority. It's a union that has a diversity of members, but is really led by communities of color, and particularly Black members, who have a powerful presence in Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. But to me, I did not seek the endorsement of any police unions because, again, I'm running. A big motivation for me for running for this seat is for the service of voices that are left out of our system. The voices of police unions are not left out of our system. There were other labor unions whose endorsement I did seek, including Alameda Labor Council and SCIU and some others, but they chose not to endorse me. But there are many members of many of these unions of nurses, teachers, educators, janitorial staff, many other kinds of unions who, outside of their union, they're out here canvassing for me. They are part of those 650 incredible active volunteers that we have. You know, to me, people can be political in the ways that they choose and active in the way that they choose, and not always go with party politics, partisan politics, and machine politics. So I'm grateful to have the support of many people who are represented by many labor unions. And so, you know, my grandparents were part of labor unions. AFSCME was their union that, like I mentioned earlier, led them to stable life, earning living wages, quality health care, the ability to have a pathway out of poverty. So I think unions can be powerful, but the ones that I'm not interested in engaging with are police unions because they have too much of a seat at the table and too much power in our current political system. And forgive me 1 second, I'll be right back.
I assume you're noticing I'm not identifying the
Sorry about that.
questioners. Okay, I assume you folks are noticing I've decided not to identify the questioners. I just feel that we should concentrate on the questions themselves. What is your position on SB 9, SB 10, SB 8, and SB 478?
I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what SB 8 is.
Okay. Go ahead with the others.
SB 9 and 10 are the ones I'm most familiar with. And I also recognize it is going to be one where many folks from different ends of this political spectrum might not agree with me on. I support SB 9 because of the fact that it has a tenant protection component, an anti-demolition component. Were I in the assembly today, before voting yes, I would want to work to make sure there's an affordability component. Because right now, SB 9 leaves up the role to jurisdictions like cities to make sure that some affordability component is there. These are duplexes, though. They're not really large multifamily units. SB 9 is only about duplexes. I know in Alameda, for example, it's the 15% affordability requirement. I want to explore what a statewide affordability requirement would look like. And I've been challenged. Well, wouldn't requiring cities to make an affordability component lead to building less housing? And I think that's an excuse for developers to not want to build housing that's affordable. And so, I would want to work on creating statewide affordability measures that don't leave it up to local jurisdictions to create certain percentages of affordability that they want. When it comes to SB 10, this really is an enabling ordinance for jurisdictions to choose to take up and then apply stronger tenant protections or affordability components on. I have serious reservations about the fact that SB 10 does not have that anti-demolition component, and because it does involve, multifamily homes, 6 to 8 units, I believe, or something like that. And I am more concerned about it, but at the same time, we do need, as a state, I do believe we need more housing. We're in a shortage of particularly 1.5 million affordable homes. And going back to what I said before, we need housing so that people can stay in their communities. So supply is not grossly different from demand. But I do want to say one thing on that note. I think that there's a lot of focus on specific production bills that, I am part of tenant unions. I'm a member of 3 different tenant unions who are opposed to SB 9 and 10, including ones who have endorsed me. And for different reasons. People are opposed to it for different reasons and have serious reservations about it, which is why I think we need to simultaneously pass stronger tenant protections, anti-demolition protections. That might come in the form of certain bills. That might come in other ways, but we need to keep people housed, and we do need to expand our housing stock. Now, where and when and how this happens is a different story, and it's nuanced. I think a lot of this debate is so polarized because everyone believes you're either one or the other. You're pro-housing, you're against housing. You're pro-tenant or you're against tenant, and I refuse to be bound by those boxes. I am pro-tenant. I am pro the need to expand housing access in general in California, and I am very pro building housing that's truly affordable. But the reality is, it's also difficult to build housing that's truly affordable. It's extremely difficult for local developers, especially ones that are not these behemoth large real estate developers, but especially the small ones, minority-owned small real estate developers in Oakland that I've talked to in the course of this campaign, who are born and raised in Oakland, for example, say they'd love to build affordable housing for their own community members and the communities they're from. But because the cost of land is so high, because they have to compete with these giant real estate hedge fund-owned developers from San Francisco or New York City or whatnot, it's hard to actually do it. So the 2 things that I, try to add nuance to this conversation about housing production is, 1, the need to implement a speculator tax. A lot of the reason it's so expensive to build is, yes, the cost of land is so high, how supply doesn't meet demand, all of that, yes. But Canada, for example, some jurisdictions in Canada started to implement a speculator tax, which means if you're a foreign-owned corporation, a developer, for example, or if you own beyond a certain number of units in a particular jurisdiction, you have to pay a tax to perhaps dissuade you from even building in the first place, but and allow the smaller real estate developers to come in. But more importantly, to make sure that you are funding affordability programs. But the other thing that I want to add some nuance to this conversation is social housing programs. I believe that because it's so difficult for government to build housing that's truly affordable, we need to ensure that we're thinking about the government stepping in to build housing that's truly affordable. There's a bill right now, I'm blanking on the number, but it's a social housing bill. And that's something that will allow, I never want to give large real estate developers a free pass for anything. If bills are specifically, and that's why I oppose SB 50, because I believe that it did give developers a free pass to build market rate housing without consequence. And I think all housing bills in the future need to be thought of with the lens of affordability and tenant protections, but also thinking, is it the private market that needs to be doing this? Why is the cost so high? How do we implement speculator taxes? All of these things, to me, are important. And I'm going to say this again because I think it's really important. And it's really important because of, like I mentioned, I'm up against a political machine that wants to put things in boxes, that don't want to think about nuance to these conversations. And to me, housing is some of the most nuanced concepts that exist. We need to be thinking about so many different people, and ultimately, I think most of us have the same goal. We need to keep people housed. We need to figure out how we don't have 170,000 homeless people in our state. And we need to make sure that people can afford to live where they work, to live where they want to live where their communities are from, and come to all of this together.
Do you have any specific comment you want to make on SB 478?
Oh, gosh. Can you just remind me what that one is about?
SB 478, as applied to Alameda, it would take all of our R2 and R6 zoning, whereas all of our what I would call low density residential zoning, not single family, low density. In Alameda, that's 1 unit for every 2,000 square feet. In some other town, it might be more density than that. But it would allow, now we're getting background from somebody. I don't know how or why, because they're muted. Let me see if I can figure out what's going on. Christopher Buckley is connected to me. I don't know whether it's Christopher or not because he's having trouble connecting. Let's see if it quiets down. So 478 would prohibit a city from declining a project for 3 to 10 units on the basis of inadequate lot size. And on the basis, and also requires that the floor area ratio does not exceed, it is not less than 1.2, which means in practical matters, you could theoretically put 10 units on a 500 square foot lot. That might be an extreme version, but what they're basically saying is whatever pencils out, you can squeeze on to a lot. That it does allow for 4-foot setbacks, but even that can be overcome if it precludes the project. And of course, the 1.2 floor area ratio guarantees it has to be a multi-storied building. And that would not be like 10. That would not be a city option. That would be mandate. Okay. Now, again, to make clear, it doesn't mean the city has to approve it, but it means it cannot deny it based on failure to meet those standards, the minimum lot standards. If that's too much to swallow to comment on today, that I can understand that.
Yes. I'm sorry. I do have to do a little more research into that one. So.
Okay. All right. All right. Now moving on. Would you have preferred saving the taxpayers money on this special runoff election by instituting instant runoff voting, aka ranked choice voting? I guess that simple question is, what's your feeling about ranked choice voting?
I support it because for candidates like me, that would be monumentally helpful. People were really shocked that I made it into the top 2 because I am not part of the Democratic Party establishment. I wasn't involved in politics at all, and that's exactly why I'm running, because I want to challenge the party. In fact, I have challenged the party. I filed a complaint against and an appeal against the California Democratic Party for fraudulent practices and for allowing allegations of fraud and unethical behavior and frankly, I mean, a clear violation of the party's own activity that constituted clear violations of the party's own bylaws involving my opponent and her husband. I don't mind challenging the establishment, and that's what I did, knowing that they're not going to listen to little old me right now, but maybe one day they will. Maybe we can continue to elect people, even in progressive districts like ours, who are going to challenge the status quo as it is. And I think in order to help more folks like me to get elected, ranked choice voting is certainly helpful and a pathway to that, as is public financing programs, and not in the way that it's being administered right now. When I was on the City of Oakland Public Ethics Commission, I was a part of the group that administered limited public financing programs, and it was very flawed. It often didn't go to people that really needed the funding the most. I'm for programs like democracy dollars. Seattle has a program, for example, that the Ethics Commission has been exploring in open at least, to make sure that rather than giving money right to candidates, why don't we put money in the hands of people? So in Seattle, for example, this program gave every registered voter, I believe, 100 or 250, up to $250 to give to a candidate of their choice. There's a reason that my opponent has $2 million coming from corporations and industries well outside of this district, well outside the state, and other things like that, rather than small dollar contributions coming within the district. And that's because, we're coming out of a global pandemic, and, people can often, it's hard for people to, even outside of a pandemic, be able to have the means to contribute to their own campaigns, to people's campaigns that they support. And I think a democracy dollar program that gives everyone in some jurisdictions the ability and the freedom to give money to a candidate of their choice would be a part of the solution. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. This was just about ranked choice voting, and I went off about inequities in our voting system. People think that voter fraud is certainly more prominent in the South and states across the country, but voter fraud and inability to access voting in our own great state of California is problematic as well. So one thing about me that, is that I canvass personally every single day. I am knocking on doors in Alameda, Oakland, and San Leandro every single day. And I go to very different neighborhoods, and it's very clear people that have gotten their ballots and people that haven't, people that know about the election and people that haven't. There's a reason there was only a 21% voter turnout the first time around. We anticipate it'll probably be less this time around in the runoff. So access to information is super critical to making sure diverse voices within our district, especially voices that don't have a seat at the table, are meaningfully heard, and that candidates who are not part of political machines, who are not backed by special powerful corporate interests, are able to do what they can do.
Thank you. So we've been talking a little bit about the differences between you and Mia Bonta, particularly on the issue of big money or corporate donations. But aside from the money issue, what are the biggest differences between you and Mia Bonta?
It's me being not steeped in politics. It's me being a community activist, a social justice lawyer, someone that has been in the forefront of seeing what laws don't serve us. Take something as relatively, seemingly uncontroversial as domestic violence. I have worked with so many survivors of abuse for whom our state laws aren't serving them. Why? Because we don't have a single lawmaker right now that's ever stepped inside a family law courtroom before. People that have not seen how these laws, even if there are sometimes with the right intentions, harm people. And I'll give you an example. There was a bill that was introduced by someone, a lawmaker with actually good intentions, to be fair, that wanted to make it easier for, it's complicated, sorry, let me make this short. That basically was intended to support survivors of violence to get civil restraining orders, a form of restraining orders that's nothing but a stay away from me order, does not involve the police or the criminal justice system. They're DVROs, domestic violence restraining orders, part of the civil court system. And despite the good intentions, the truly good intentions, but complete lack of reality of what happens on the ground in family law courtrooms, this bill would have made it 10 times harder for a survivor of domestic violence to be able to get a restraining order for reasons unrelated to physical abuse, but emotional abuse, gaslighting, stalking, and many other forms of domestic violence that occurs. And someone in my shoes that's done direct community service work sees how this exact kind of law backfires, how this makes it harder to support survivors rather than help them and empower people. Same thing with tenant protections. I worked very closely with a number of survivors of domestic violence. And again, most number of tenants I've worked with have never missed a day of rent in their life, but were being evicted for reasons unrelated, which included calling the police when their abuser was abusing them and wanting to call the police for sources of safety. Many landlords who don't like this and we're evicting these tenants who are my clients based on those reasons. That is technically against state law, but because of the wording in which it's, well, firstly, most people don't know about these protections, which is why I did a lot of Know Your Rights community legal aid trainings to different community groups. And even more so, judges don't know these laws as well and don't enforce them and don't apply them adequately. So long story short, one of the main differences between me and my opponent, apart from the corporate interests, is an understanding and being in touch with actual communities. Being a supposed nonprofit executive does not mean you're working with community members. There is a huge difference in someone that is seeing the negative consequences of our inadequate rental relief bill, our inadequate COVID-related worker safety protections, our inadequate family law and domestic violence laws, and someone that says these statements very vaguely. So that is a huge difference. And I'm going to say it again. I know I've mentioned it before. The corporate interests really do matter. Who are you going to be accountable to when you have almost $2 million of money coming from corporations and corporate executives? Are you going to be accountable to them or accountable to people, to everyday people in this district? And to me, I am only going to be accountable to the people of California who I'm proud to be people who are supporting my campaign, not big corporate special interest groups. I'm not accepting corporate PAC money or a dime, and I have returned a contribution from a corporation that did want to donate, not because I believe, and I'll make this clear, I don't believe all corporations are evil, but I don't think they have a role in politics, and that's why I'm refusing them, because we have way too much of that.
So you have basically said that you have this on the ground experience with actually working with people that you think you can translate into legislation. How do you plan to get legislation passed and build support for your policies?
Yeah, I think it's coalition building that I've done all my life, that I am doing in this campaign. It's my propensity to listen, even when people tell me not to listen, and to discourage listening to certain groups and to discourage engaging with certain populations. That's not something I'm ever going to do. And same thing with coalition building and to get things passed. I want to find the legislators that are out there supportive of a $22 minimum wage, regardless of what party they're from. I want to find people that are excited about Medicare for all, regardless of where they're from. And I remember very vividly, and I know this for a fact, yes, I'm a Democrat, but during the course of this pandemic, as people are losing housing and healthcare because of the havoc that COVID has caused onto people from all over the political spectrum are questioning things. Yes, I call myself a progressive, but I think it's important that I'm actually engaging with people on the issue specifically and thinking more deeply about how we can come to how we can unite on specific issues, which include housing. So I very vividly remember January of this year, there was a Republican lawmaker from the Central Valley who, like me, because I was part of the tenants' rights groups that worked statewide, bemoaning the lack of protections for tenants during the pandemic, and really being frustrated about this very flawed rental relief program that came into effect. And the fact that he came onto the assembly floor and said, I don't call myself a progressive, I'm a proud Republican, but all I know is that my constituents, many of my hardworking, whatever constituents, are being kicked out of their own homes in the middle of a global pandemic, and we need to change this. That made me realize that we can find coalition, certainly among Democrats, and if not, people from across the spectrum when it comes to issues. I'm tired of boxes. I'm tired of being put into boxes, and I'm tired of people putting me into boxes. I want to focus on how we can make sure every Californian has healthcare, how we can make sure that every Californian is housed. And it's going to take a lot of nuance to these conversations rather than putting people in boxes.
Okay. I have a question here with regard to aid for the homeless. And it has some editorializing in it, so I'm trying to just narrow it down to the actual question. Rob Bonta, the person you hope to replace, has expressed strong support for language to expand SB 35 to exempt a broad array of homeless service projects such as shelters, respite centers, acute care, etc., from local control and attempts to stop them. Would you agree to co-sponsoring such legislation if you were elected? What other steps would you take to fast track and protect from opposition critically needed homeless services?
Yeah. I don't know if I understood the entirety of that question with regard to SB 35, but to me, it is incredibly important that we have expanded homelessness services. One of the most life-changing experiences for me as a public servant from many years ago was working. When I mentioned I worked as a home visiting community health worker, kind of quite in the beginning of my role, being asked to meet a mother. I was working with pregnant mothers at the time, outside of her home, and she was pregnant and had an infant, and had just returned from the hospital after experiencing severe domestic violence injuries. And we met outside of her home because she learned she'd been evicted while she was in the hospital, and all of her personal belongings and life possessions had been thrown away while she was there. So I met this woman with nothing to her name, literally nothing to her name, and in a high-risk pregnancy with an infant, who was trying to understand where to go. We called no less than 20 shelters in multiple counties to see if there was a bed for this woman and her infant, this pregnant woman and her infant. And to me, and there wasn't. There just was not. We tried scrupulously for hours and for a few days. And there really wasn't. To me, that shows that we are not prioritizing services, not only for our homeless population, but the most vulnerable of our unhoused community, which includes survivors of violence. And to note, 80% of women who are homeless with children are survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And this is incredibly important when we think about how to address our homelessness crisis. We need better services. We need more shelters. And again, I'm not quite sure about the premise of this question, but if it's about funding to build more homeless shelters, I absolutely believe in that, because a number of places that I've called with so many different clients for people that desperately want beds and don't get them is shameful. So we need to make it easier to build more homelessness services, to use existing structures to build spaces where people can be housed, to expand programs where hotels and motels can be bought out to house community members, to purchase vacant buildings and to convert vacant properties and vacant buildings so that our homeless community can be housed, but especially those who are the most vulnerable among the homeless, which includes survivors of violence, which includes people not only suffering from addiction for sure, but also individuals with developmental disabilities, which account for about 40% of our population. One of the biggest issues that I see in policymaking is the fact that we're not using any kind of nuanced lens when it comes to our homeless community. Everyone assumes that it's a one-size-fits-all solution, that, all right, you give someone a tiny home or a shed, that they're good. But there's so many people who do need to be in a supportive environment. By giving someone a home or an apartment isn't going to work for them. And we need to expand our conception of what holistic homelessness services are and better fund it. And it's not that we don't spend the money. We've spent over $13 billion over the past 2 years as a state on homelessness solutions. But do we have any kind of 10-year plan to address it? No. Do we have a centralized agency to address and streamline homelessness services? No. Our state auditor herself has said, we're not putting money in the right places. We're not putting money into the most evidence-based programs. And that's important to me. If we're spending the money, let's make sure it's going into the most evidence-based programs that are housing the most diverse number of people that are unhoused for extremely different reasons. I keep mentioning survivors of violence, but that's a lot of my background. People with developmental disabilities. We also have the working poor who missed a few months of rent and are homeless. They require very different solutions from from a young person who's homeless because they lived in a household of violence and they wanted to leave. There are so many different reasons why people are homeless, and we need to take into account those solutions and offer more concretely diverse services.
What do you mean by Medicare for a Medicare for All network in California? I believe that's what you said in one of your statements. Is that something different from a state plan for Medicare for All?
Medicare for All would basically mean your doctor is not gonna change, but the person paying for your doctor's visit is gonna change. So there are proposals for a national Medicare for All that are in the works. There are strong proponents of this, but to me, what I would want to focus on is a bill that we actually already have introduced called AB 1400, which would implement a California-wide Medicare for All system to make sure that every Californian can afford quality health care and not pay out of pocket. And this kind of system would actually save our state over $4 billion in the first decade of implementation. Yes, of course, there are upfront costs. And one of my personal priorities would be to try to get some of these upfront costs addressed through getting what's called a Medicare for All waiver that will fund at least 2/3 of those upfront costs that we need to implement this program. It will take time, but it's more importantly going to take a lot of political willpower, which we do not have right now because not a lack of Californians' interest. Again, that 70% of Californians want it, but the interest of making sure, but the interest of powerful industries, including big pharma and health insurance companies that are currently actively making sure that these kinds of policies don't get passed.
What do you think needs to be done to address climate change in California and locally?
There are so many things to be done. One thing, I support a Green New Deal, which would comprise of a series of legislation. There are, of course, proposals for Green New Deals at the federal level, but I think there's a lot that can be done in California. Yes, Newsom has said by 2035 we will eliminate, we will phase out, gas-powered vehicles and move towards electric vehicles. But I think we also need to ask the question of the communities that can afford electric vehicles. I think we need to prioritize public transportation. We need to expand public transportation, especially public transit that's emission-free and accessible. We're about to get at least a couple of $1 billion from the Biden administration for infrastructure improvements and development, and I think a lot of that should go into making sure we have an expanded network of public transportation. And for someone like me, this is really important because I love taking the bus. BART's great too, but I have taken AC Transit my entire life, and that's something that I really love doing. And I want to work towards a system where no one has to live more than a third of a mile away from a bus stop or public transit, and actually be able to access transportation in a way that serves all of us and serves our environment. I also believe we need to start phasing out diesel trucks and implement, fully renewable energy source trucks and other forms of transportation as well. And that's going to involve a transition. There are jobs that are going to be changed. This is a part of the process to make sure that we can all live in a universe a few decades from now that breathes clean airs, so we can keep our shorelines that are gradually receding every year, so we can not have to live in a place with a wildfire season anymore. And part of that process is taking active efforts to reduce emissions, build public transit now. It also is thinking about corporate polluters. There was a bill that I was incredibly dismayed was taken off the table this year, SB 280. To me, some of these bills regarding the environment that are taken off the table are so relatively innocuous. They're not at all, to me, that big of a deal. It's not a heavy hit on the oil and gas industry, but SB 280 was about corporate polluter accountability, to make sure that corporate polluters are regularly publishing their emissions. And that couldn't even get passed. So what prospect do we really have to ban fracking if we can't even get a bill about corporate polluter accountability not being passed? Same thing with SB 467. It was converted into a multiple year bill, so essentially taken off the table for this year. We don't have as many extraction sites in our district, but in Southern California and a lot of other parts of the state we do. And this bill was important to create critical buffer zones to make sure that oil extraction sites are not so close to schools and residential communities and things like that. But had spacing for that. And again, these things were taken off the table in committee, not from Republicans, but from Democrats. And Democrats whose campaigns were funded by the oil and gas industry and other special corporate interests. So this is a part and parcel of addressing climate change. And there's so many other solutions that I didn't quite discuss. We need to expand CCAs, which is community choice energy programs. We need to make sure that we have resiliency hubs in the meantime, while we still have wildfire season, to make sure that communities have the support that they need to deal with wildfires, to deal with extreme heat, to deal with climate change in other ways, community support systems. I recently met someone that was working on one of these resiliency hubs at the Alameda Point Collaborative, who's really excited to continue work on this in Alameda for local efforts at building resiliency, and was really excited to have actually quite a long conversation and learn about what was going on at the collaborative to address climate change locally and mitigate harms locally as well.
Janani, we had scheduled this to end at 4 o'clock. Now we started a little bit late, you didn't come on until about 10 after 4, but I know you're on a tight schedule. So I don't know if you have any more time for us or not. I don't want to throw you off your schedule.
I could stay 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay. Well, here's a good question that might deal with that. 5 minutes. California's, excuse me, wrong question. Given the committee assignments depend on, I'm talking about in the assembly, depend on being willing to comply with the speaker's policies. How do you plan to function effectively in the committee system when so many of the party's policies are controlled by special interest campaign funders who would scuttle the programs you cherish?
Yeah, so firstly, there's a practical lens for this question, and there's a longer term lens for this question. Firstly, I'll start with the theoretical lens of this question. Why do we live in it? Why are we part of a system where we completely are at the beck and call of the speaker and specifically specifically funding? This really often comes down to, and I have gotten this question before in other environments, if you're not taking corporate money, how are you going to get committee assignments that you want? And my answer is, look at all of the leaders that we have at the federal level that are refusing corporate contributions, that are leaders in our state government. Everyone from Bernie Sanders to Pamela Jayapal to actually not that many, Congressman Ro Khanna, who endorsed me in this race, and many others that are corporate-free candidates, and the powerful committee that they are able to serve on. People discount the power of grassroots campaigning, that large numbers of small dollar donations can make a difference. And that's what's gotten me this far. Yes, I'm up against the $2 million that I am, but the fact is that we can build, everyone assumes that you can't raise money off of small dollar donations, but we can. We absolutely can raise money off of small dollar contributions. Enough in the interim where money does play a role in your assignments, yes, into making that happen. But more broadly, to questioning, why does money play such a role in assignments? Why does building currying favor with the speaker and some of these Democratic Party heavyweights mean so much in the process? So to me, and at a more micro level, I am going to hopefully once I win this race, the reality is I will also be up for election in 2022. And small dollar donations that I've we have almost 800 small dollar individual contributors in this space. That's a lot of people, and that's an incredible base of supporters, far beyond any of my opponents from even the initial round of 8 candidates that were in this race, and certainly among my competitor right now. That shows people power, and this is just the beginning. Once I'm in office, that number is going to grow. We're going to be able to get so much support to raise the money that we do need to support other things. The other reality is that our current politicians, a third of our state legislature, is about to be termed out by 2024. So they're challengers to multiple individuals in 2022, including our speaker, including a challenger that got within a few points of our current speaker of winning, who was similarly a corporate-free, progressive, social justice activist candidate. So none of the leaders that are currently there, in my opinion, a third of them are not going to be in office by 2024. But this is the beginning, and there are certainly many more challengers to existing seats. So to me, this is the beginning of a powerful movement. I guess I'll close off here. It's not just about this race. I think enough Californians from all across the political spectrum are tired of the role of money in politics. I'm tired of the fact that money controls committee assignments. I'm tired of the fact that money controls so many things, including elections. And I personally refuse to allow the mindset that because I don't have $2 million in my campaign coffers, I can't win, because we can. Because anyone that's excited about the issues that I'm talking about the need for challenging the status quo are people that are in this district and ready for change, are ready for systems that are expansive and inclusive and listen to people. And I certainly believe that in this district, and I believe that for all of California. So we should be thinking creatively. We should not be accepting status quo, business as usual politics. We should be imagining a world where corporations don't determine our policies. They don't buy elections and campaigns, but ones where people have voices. So I imagine in 2024, where at the very least, a third of the legislature are corporate free, and where committee assignments are not determined by how much you donate to the Democratic Party. So I will stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to close this up, investing in this campaign means that you believe in investing in the collective power of people and changing the political status quo. Mia Bonta has over 1.5 million. She's received hundreds of thousands from gambling industry, medical insurance lobby, beverage distributors, real estate interests who want to buy our representation. Janani is not taking a penny from corporations or corporate interest PACs. She also doesn't have any money from public safety unions. To counter this, we need to help her raise money to be able to spread her message. The fact that Janani beat so many other candidates and elected officials shows that her campaign resonates more with the people of this district, but she needs to be able to reach them. I've already made my contribution. I hope many of you will too. Go to jananiforca.com and go to the contribute or donation page. All funds are geared toward reaching voters. Text and phone banking systems, social media ads, and materials cost money, and they're necessary to counter the ads that we are all seeking. And while you're on the site, volunteer to put some sweat equity into the project and actually help the campaign. Thank you all for being here. I think it's amazing that most of you have stuck with this for the entire presentation. We have well over 30 people that have joined us from basically all political spectrums, including some who support Mia Bonta, which is fine. We want to hear from everybody. Thank you all, and have a great evening. And Janani, anything you want to say finally, or are we done?
I think we're done, but thank you for listening. And I am excited to build a movement for justice. And I hope you're ready for that as well.
Bye-bye, everybody.